The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. Today we will discuss another story in which husband betrayed his wife. Pregnant woman Janet Abaroa was discovered dead in her Durham, North Carolina, home on the evening of April 26, 2005, with her 6-year-old son Caden sleeping in the adjacent room. A complex network of dishonesty, adultery, and financial difficulties was exposed by the probe. Police discovered alarming contradictions in her husband Raven's account when they investigated the matter. The story was already complicated, and accusations of embezzlement and a dubious life insurance policy added further dimensions. What actually transpired that fateful evening? Born in Virginia on June 19, 1979, Janet Abaroa was the 7th child in a family of 10 devoted Mormons. She stood out from a young age since she was bright and sporty. She was quite good at basketball, swimming, and soccer. She joined South Virginia University's inaugural women's soccer team as a result of her dedication to both academics and athletics. Janet met Raven Abaroa while she was a student at the university in 1988. He played soccer for the men's squad and came across as a charming suitor who was religiously similar to her. They became inseparable as their friendship grew quickly. By August 2000, Janet was only 20 years old when she married Raven in a religiously compliant wedding. Due to employment chances with Eurosport, the pair relocated to Durham, North Carolina, after getting married. They seemed like the ideal couple at first. But as their relationship began to show symptoms of infidelity and financial pressure, danger started to appear. When Raven Abaroa admitted to having several indiscretions in 2003, Janet and Raven's marriage started to fall apart. This disclosure involved a relationship with a minor, which caused serious tensions in their already shaky relationship in addition to shattering Janet's trust. Raven briefly moved out after this revelation, allowing Janet to deal with the emotional upheaval by herself. In 2005, Janet learned she was expecting their second child, which added to the couple's problems. She found herself in a difficult situation as a result of this unexpected revelation. She struggled to reconcile the truth of Raven's adultery with her dedication to her marriage. Raven Abaroa was arrested in December 2004 for stealing from the sports goods stores where he and Janet worked. He was found to have been involved in a conspiracy to steal more than $9,000 worth of merchandise from the store during the course of the inquiry. Raven had a deliberate approach to his embezzlement plot. He made arrangements for the delivery of athletic shoes to their residence. He used the moniker Footballer Guy to sell the sneakers online after obtaining the merchandise. He was able to benefit from stolen items while appearing legitimate thanks to this strategy. When the supplier contacted the sporting goods business for unpaid merchandise, the embezzlement was discovered. After detectives swiftly located Raven through a delivery address check, he was immediately fired from the store and faced legal action. Despite not being a part in the thefts, Janet was severely humiliated and ashamed of her husband's behavior, which caused her to quit her work as well. Raven was able to escape going to jail for his theft. Rather, he received a 2-year probationary term and a roughly $10,000 restitution order. The young family was already having a hard time making ends meet, and the financial burden from Raven's embezzlement and the ensuing legal issues put them under much more hardship. Their religious community and landlord had helped them, but Raven's actions made their precarious financial condition worse. Raven took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Janet as tensions increased, which sparked questions about his motivations. Given their unstable financial status and the fact that he had never owned such policies before, this choice appeared especially dubious. Janet began to worry more and more about Raven's violent actions toward her friends because she feared his erratic bouts of rage. These elements, infidelity, unstable finances, and rising tensions, created the conditions for the impending tragedy. Financial and personal issues combined to create a volatile atmosphere that eventually resulted in the disastrous events of April 26, 2005. For Janet Abaroa, the day started off like any other on April 26, 2005. She went back home after picking up her 6-month-old baby, Caden, from daycare. Later that night, the couple was scheduled to meet with a member of their church community. Tensions in the home were evident throughout the day as a result of persistent marital problems. Raven Abaroa was getting ready to head to Morrisville for a soccer game at 7:30 p.m. Before leaving, he made the strange decision to lock their 2 dogs in the shed. The dogs usually slept indoors and gave Janet a sense of security, so her behavior was unusual. This conduct sparked concerns among investigators when they were questioned later. According to Raven, Janet was getting ready for bed when he left the house. But when he got home at around 10 o'clock at night, he discovered her dead and in an odd posture on the floor. The first thing he told the 911 dispatcher was that she had been shot. She had been stabbed several times, it was later discovered. On April 26, 2005, investigators found Janet Abaroa kneeling on the floor of their bedroom when they got to the Abaroa residence. There were signs that she had been viciously attacked, and the situation was bleak. Multiple stab wounds to Janet were eventually revealed by an autopsy. In particular, she suffered 2 fatal stab wounds to her neck and chest, as well as 3 severe stab wounds on her left arm, which was determined to be a defense wound. She died as a result of the deadly stab wounds that cut an artery and entered her lung. Only a handful of Janet's closest friends were aware that she was pregnant at the time of her murder, but the coroner confirmed this as well. Valuables at the crime site were undamaged, and there were no indications of a struggle or forced entry. The only items missing from the residence were Raven's laptop and a few kitchen utensils. The discovery of Janet's wedding ring and other jewels undamaged on her vanity suggests that the victim either knew her attacker or voluntarily allowed them into her house. A bloody shoe print and a fingerprint that did not match Raven's were among the crucial pieces of evidence gathered from the crime site. The circumstances surrounding Janet's death and Raven's assertions were seriously called into question by these results. Almost instantly, Raven Abaroa's panicked call claiming that his wife Janet was not breathing was questioned. His original assertion during the call was that she had been shot. In stark contrast to Raven's claim of a shooting, emergency personnel discovered Janet dead from multiple stab wounds when they arrived at the Abaroa property. Investigators were immediately suspicious of Raven's assertions because of this disparity. The contradictions didn't stop there. Raven cooperated with investigators at first, but as the inquiry went on, he told Janet's relatives that she had killed herself. Her family, who were aware of Janet's temperament and her strong religious convictions against suicide, viewed her assertion with suspicion. Raven also gave law enforcement contradictory statements. At first, he claimed to have discovered Janet dead, but he then said she was still alive and had questioned him about why it hurt so badly. However, he told the 911 dispatcher that Janet had been shot during his call rather than requesting assistance for her. Suspicion that he was involved in Janet's murder was increased by these contradictions in his story. Raven and their son, Caden, relocated to Utah shortly after Janet's passing. Investigators were taken aback by his choice to leave North Carolina. Concerns about his intentions were further heightened when he tried to claim the life insurance benefit for Janet even before to her funeral. The day before the murder, on April 25, 2005, Raven had backed up all of his laptop's data to CDs. Detectives found out during the course of the inquiry. His intentions prior to Janet's death were called into question by this especially strange timing. These disks, which included crucial information backed up just before the murder, were discovered by Janet's sister during the post-murder sifting of belongings. The finding of this material added to the growing body of evidence against Raven and raised the possibility of premeditation on his side. Raven married a single mother named Vanessa Pond in 2008. She had a daughter who went to the same daycare as his son, Caden. Raven persisted in pursuing Vanessa despite her initial reluctance to date him, winning her over with his love and concern for her child. He gained Vanessa's trust by portraying himself as a loving partner and father. But shortly, concerning trends surfaced that were similar to those observed in his first marriage to Janet. According to reports, Raven's aggressive habits were reminiscent to those he had showed while married to Janet. Those close to Vanessa became alarmed when accusations of emotional manipulation and domineering conduct emerged. As Raven took charge of Vanessa's life, friends and relatives observed that she started to distance herself from her support system and grew more lonely. These accusations of violence ultimately led to the dissolution of Vanessa and Raven's marriage. Unresolved difficulties from Raven's background and an inability to sustain good connections were suggested by this cycle of conduct, which revealed a troubling pattern that appeared to follow him into his new relationships. The investigation into Janet Abaroa's murder was fraught with difficulties in the months that followed. There was no concrete evidence connecting her husband, Raven Abaroa, to the crime, despite the early suspicions. At the crime scene, investigators discovered a bloody shoe print and a fingerprint, but neither one matched Raven's. The prosecution was unable to present a compelling case against him because of this dearth of hard evidence. Furthermore, several witnesses who saw Raven at a Morrisville soccer game verified his alibi for the murderous night. Detectives found it difficult to square his attendance at the game with Janet's death timeline, which further complicated the inquiry even though this alibi first seemed to clear him. Before Detective Charles Soule took over in late 2009, the case remained unsolved as time went on and leads dried up. Soule was resolved to take a new look at every facet of the inquiry. He carefully examined the material gathered during the preliminary investigation and started concentrating on contradictions in Raven's words and actions. Additionally, Detective Soule started to wonder if Janet had been wearing her contact lenses when she passed away. He reasoned that it would be inconsistent with Raven's story that she was killed soon after he went for soccer practice if she was ready for bed but still had her contacts in. Soule concluded that exhuming Janet's body might yield important evidence to support this viewpoint. In order to ascertain if she had been wearing her contact lenses at the time of her death, which gave a clear chronology of the events leading up to her murder, the exhumation was required. Janet's body was retrieved from a Pennsylvania cemetery at the beginning of 2010. Investigators verified during the test that she had passed away with her contact lenses remaining in her eyes. This discovery implied that she had been attacked soon after he departed for the soccer game, rather than getting ready for bed as Raven had stated. This exhumation has important outcomes. They suggested possible premeditation on Raven's behalf in addition to being inconsistent with his timetable. Her contact lenses raise additional concerns over Raven's role in Janet's murder by implying that she was taken by surprise. As Detective Soule put these pieces together, Raven's contradictory claims, his dubious actions following Janet's passing, and now the exhumation evidence all suggested that he was at fault. It became harder and harder to overlook Raven's story's contradictions. Authorities were ready to act decisively because of the growing body of evidence pointing to foul play and the developing suspicion that Raven had planned the murder of his wife. The scenario was set for Janet Abaroa to finally receive justice through an arrest. Raven Abaroa was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the death of his wife, Janet Abaroa, and was taken into custody in Idaho on February 1, 2010. After a protracted inquiry that uncovered contradictions in his testimonies and questionable conduct regarding the circumstances of Janet's murder, he was arrested. Raven's honesty and complicity in the crime were seriously questioned by the inquiry. Law enforcement finally took decisive action against him as a result. Raven Abaroa's eagerly awaited trial began in April 2013 and lasted for 5 weeks. Because of the complexity of the case and the nature of the crime, the trial received a lot of media attention. The prosecution made a strong case that was mostly supported by circumstantial evidence. More than 80 witnesses were invited to testify, including family members and friends who may shed light on Raven's violent inclinations and cunning. Among the most important testimonies were those of women who had personally witnessed Raven's aggressive behavior. These witnesses painted a picture of a man capable of carrying out such a horrible deed by describing incidents of aggressiveness and emotional manipulation. Janet's close friend was one prominent witness who spoke about Janet's worries about Raven's erratic outbursts and her concerns for her safety. The purpose of this testimony was to prove a motivation based on Raven's violent actions and their failing marriage. Critical evidence from the crime scene, such as the lack of forced entrance, was also emphasized by the prosecution, showing that Janet most likely knew her attacker. They maintained that Raven showed signs of guilt by relocating to Utah with their son, Caden, and trying to collect a life insurance benefit after Janet was killed. The defense, on the other hand, emphasized that there was no concrete proof that connected Raven to the killing. They contended that rather than using hard evidence, the prosecution mostly relied on emotive testimony and circumstantial evidence. The prosecution's allegations were refuted by the defense, which emphasized that no shoe prints or fingerprints that matched Raven were discovered at the crime scene. They also highlighted Raven's verified alibi. His attendance at a soccer game at the time of Janet's murder was confirmed by several witnesses. Since it implied that he couldn't have been at home when the crime was committed, this alibi was essential to the defense. In addition, the defense questioned the credibility of witnesses who claimed to have seen or heard anything odd on the night of the murder and drew attention to discrepancies in their statements. They sought to instill reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds by drawing attention to these gaps in the evidence. After 5 exhausting weeks of testimony and debate, the trial ended in a deadlocked jury in May 2013. 11 jurors voted guilty while 1 remained innocent, preventing the panel from reaching a unanimous decision. Both parties were frustrated and unsure of what would happen next as a result of this impasse, which led to a mistrial. The case's complexity was brought to light by the outcome. The prosecution produced strong circumstantial evidence, but in the end, a conviction was not possible because Raven was not directly connected to Janet's murder. The mistrial also revealed sharply differing views on Raven's guilt or innocence, which paved the way for other court cases in what would turn out to be a drawn-out fight for justice. Knowing that this was far from done, both parties prepared for what lay ahead as talks regarding a possible retrial got underway. Janet's family was seeking justice and closure for their loved one's untimely death because the trial had left them with more questions than answers. The prosecution and defense started talking about a possible plea agreement after the 2013 mistrial as they tried to assess fresh information that had surfaced during the inquiry. The report of Janet Abaroa's body exhumation in July 2010 was one of the main pieces of evidence that the prosecution believed could influence the jury in the retrial. Of all the contradictions Raven had shown, Janet's contact lenses were the most significant. When the exhumation report revealed that there were still pieces of contact lenses in Janet's eyes, it disproved his assertion that she was about to go to bed. According to Detective Soul's theory, she wasn't ready for bed yet if she hadn't taken out the lenses. Additionally, she was attacked and killed shortly after Raven departed for his soccer match if she wasn't ready for bed. Therefore, the entire situation would be attributed to Raven, who might have locked up the dog and feigned to go to a football game in order to deny Janet any protection. Since Janet recognized him, there were no indications of forced entry or a request for assistance, which she would have done in the event of an intruder. After carrying out the murder, he departed for the football game, which supported his alibi. He would phone 911 when he got back and say that his wife was dead, but he would then change his mind and say that she was alive when he got there. It appeared likely that if a new trial were to be held, the jury would be persuaded to find him guilty of first-degree murder, even though all of this was theoretical evidence and neither the bloody footprints nor the fingerprint from the crime scene matched. In relation to the passing of his wife, Janet Abaroa, Raven Abaroa accepted an Alford plea for voluntary manslaughter on March 12, 2014. With this plea, he was able to admit that there was enough evidence to prosecute him without confessing to any wrongdoing. Following the 2013 mistrial, the prosecution and defense engaged in lengthy negotiations before agreeing to accept this plea agreement. Raven would enter a guilty plea to voluntary manslaughter, a lower charge than first-degree murder, according to the rules of the Alford plea. Although the offender did not plan to kill, this allegation usually shows that their conduct were extremely careless or irresponsible, which resulted in someone's death. By agreeing to this plea, Raven essentially admitted that, should the matter go to trial again, the evidence against him was sufficient to guarantee a conviction. A number of circumstances contributed to the Alford plea's acceptance. Both parties acknowledged the difficulty of seeking a new trial following the mistrial. While the defense aimed to lessen the possibility of Raven receiving a harsh sentence, the prosecution needed to guarantee a conviction without running the risk of another hung jury. Raven was given a sentence of 8 to 10 years in jail as part of the plea deal, although he would serve a shorter term since he was given credit for time served, which was roughly 4 years. The severity of Janet's death was reflected in the sentence, which also took Raven's plea of culpability into account. Raven avoided a harsher punishment connected with first-degree murder, which carries heavier sanctions and demonstrates planned purpose, by agreeing to the voluntary manslaughter charge. He might publicly uphold his innocence while admitting that his acts played a role in Janet's demise by entering a guilty plea to voluntary manslaughter. This calculated action most likely sought to lessen public scrutiny and give the two families concerned some sort of closure. In the end, this plea deal was a turning point in the case, ending one phase but leaving open issues of Janet Abaroa's justice and the effects of domestic abuse on relationships. The Alford plea's acceptance showed how legal tactics can affect the course of high-stakes criminal cases, especially when there is a dearth of direct evidence but enough circumstantial evidence to sway the decisions of both prosecutors and defendants. After serving time for his Alford plea of voluntary manslaughter in connection with the murder of his wife, Janet Abaroa, Raven Abaroa was released from jail on Christmas Day, December 25, 2017. After being released, he returned to Utah in an attempt to start over after the turbulent events leading up to Janet's death. Following Janet's untimely death and the ensuing court action, the case's verdicts continued to have a significant impact on her family. They continued to support victims of domestic abuse because they believed that justice had not been sufficiently served in Janet's murder. Since then, Janet Abaroa's tale has been used as a model for law enforcement training on domestic abuse investigations. Her case serves as a crucial reminder of the difficulties that arise in these kinds of circumstances and the significance of conducting in-depth investigations when handling possible cases of domestic violence. In order to better prepare police to identify the warning indications of domestic violence and respond accordingly, law enforcement agencies have included lessons learned from Janet's sad experience into their training programs. By these initiatives, Janet's legacy continues to influence lives outside of her own, underscoring the critical need for activism and awareness in the battle against domestic abuse. Her family's dedication to this case demonstrates their conviction that no one should have to go through what Janet went through, and they work hard to make sure that her tale has a good impact on generations to come. The investigations were unable to determine whether Raven Abaroa was personally engaged or not. However, a lot of people think that his actions toward Janet prior to the incident, his adultery, his involvement with a juvenile, his abuse, and his erratic outbursts of rage were sufficient evidence of his guilt. His activities after her death, his attempts to portray the entire case as a suicide, his attempts to withdraw Janet's life insurance money even before the funeral, his inconsistent assertions to law enforcement, and his flight to Utah could not have all been coincidences. Additionally, The recurrence of the same violence and erratic rage patterns in his second marriage raised serious questions about whether the legal system was correct to grant him a reduced charge and permit him to enter into a plea deal. In spite of everything, Raven is leading a free life, mostly because there isn't any concrete evidence against him. Do you believe he was the primary perpetrator of the heinous murder of his wife? And in light of the circumstantial evidence and testimony against him, was the jury's verdict of not guilty the correct one? Please share your opinions in the comments section below.